Odd Conduit Media.
The Sandman Unlocked.
Hello, dreamers, and welcome to another episode of The Sandman Unlocked. I'm one of your co-hosts, Sean, and I'm thrilled you're joining us for our breakdown of The Sandman, episode 11, Dream of a Thousand Cats, and Calliope. I'm joined by two co-hosts who walk among us, and we do not know them. Ben. Hello, Ben.
Greetings, Sean.
And Ashley. Hey, Ashley.
Hi, Sean. On each TV Deep Dive, we'll be working our way through 4 sections. First, we'll summarize that week's episode and provide our hot takes. Then we get into our scene-by-scene breakdown. We wrap up by offering our final thoughts. Sean, over to you for the summary.
All right, thank you, Ashley. Okay, so we've got 2 stories going on here. In the first one, Dream of a Thousand Cats, it starts off, we meet a young kitten living a comfortable domestic life in a quaint English village. As night falls and her owners retire, a street cat appears outside and helps the kitten escape through an upstairs open window. And as the two travel down these village streets and into a graveyard, meeting other cats along the way, we learn that they're going to hear another cat speak. A cat with a very particular message. From atop a statue of an angel, a Siamese cat, played by Sandra Oh, tells a strange and sad story. The cat tells of a comfortable home life with humans until she meets a lover and has kittens that are, according to her owners, not worth anything since they are purebred. She watches as her kittens are taken from her and driven off, and we see her owner carry the kittens in a sack with a brick to a pond, and he callously throws the kittens in as we hear the Sandra Oh cat express how she could feel her kittens as the cold water took them. So that night, pondering over this injustice, the cat prays, and as she sleeps, she's brought to the dreaming. There, a skull-headed crow in a field of bones tells her that she may find revelation in a distant cave if she's brave and keeps to the path. She travels through haunted woods, winter mountains, cold streams, and an endless void until she reaches the cave of the Cat of Dreams. She's granted access to the cave's guardians and meets with Dream, in cat form, who shows her a world where cats are massive creatures that rule the earth and are waited on hand and foot by small primitive humans. They're groomed and fed by humans and hunt them for sport as they please. This, says the Cat of Dreams, is the way the world once was, until a human rose up and explained that dreams create the world and that if enough humans dreamed it, they could make a world where they were not subaltern to cats. Eventually, this prophet convinces enough people, perhaps only 1,000, who all dreamed the same dream, and the world was transformed into one where not only did humans rule, but had always ruled. There had never been an age of cats. The Cat of Dreams tells Sandra Oh cat that she knows what she must do, and sends her back to the waking world with his blessing. Sandra Oh cat wraps up her story with a call to action, encouraging all the cats in attendance to dream the world the way it rightfully is, where cats are the masters of the earth. And despite some disbelief among the attendees, the little cat believes. And the next night, her human owners coo over her adoringly as they watch her dreaming, hunting in her sleep. In the second part, we meet Richard Maddock, a celebrated one-hit wonder of an author who's struggling with writer's block. After a lecture, he meets with a young doctor from whom he collects a trichinobezoar, a mass of ingested congealed hair once thought to have mystical properties. Maddock needs this very weird and creepy item to trade to one Erasmus Fry, a reclusive and forgotten but once very successful writer. Fry's a vile man, vicious and cynical, but he has something Maddock wants. Fry keeps a muse in captivity, one of the 9 mythical goddesses that inspired the arts in ancient Greece. Fry captured her in Greece, using arcane knowledge to bind her to him. For decades, he kept her locked away, abusing her and exploiting her for her gifts. And now Fry intends to trade her to Maddock. Maddock expresses doubt and trepidation, but Fry reminds him she is not human, and is there to be used by humanity. So Fry offers her to Maddock, and even though she says, he's promised to set her free, Writers are liars, he tells her, and Maddox accepts. So the muse, we learn, is named Calliope, and at Maddox's home, she demands he set her free. She's a goddess, she says, not a possession. So he promises to release her if she helps him with one book. She refuses. He kind of leaves her locked up, and he tries, begging for her help. She refuses, but after a threatening call from his agent explaining that he's in breach of his contract, the advance he got for his next novel, Richard abandons the pretense of civility and goes upstairs to take from her what she would not give. When we see him again, he's at his computer writing, his shirt unbuttoned, and a long bloody scratch down his cheek. In her room, Calliope prays to the fates who appear before her. They can't help her, they say, nor can the gods, nor the endless. They inform her of Dream's imprisonment and the sleeping sickness his disappearance caused. They also reveal that he and Calliope were once close, having had a child. It seems, however, that their relationship ended poorly, and the two bear bitter feelings for one another. While Calliope yearns for freedom, Maddox's dreams come true. Everything he writes is a hit, first taking the publishing world, then Hollywood by storm. We follow Maddox as he celebrates his success, positioning himself as this caring, empathetic author with this feminist, intersectional viewpoint. A man who uses his power wisely and fairly. All the while, of course, he keeps Calliope as a prisoner, exploits her gifts, and refuses to release her, just as Erasmus Fry had. So Calliope continues to hope for release, and after once again petitioning Maddox and once again being refused, she happens to glance at a newspaper revealing that the sleeping sickness the fates mentioned to her had ended. The world's been waking up. Calliope puts two and two together, realizing that this means Morpheus is free. She summons him, and boy, old Morpheus is pissed. He agrees to help her, despite their old grudges. He confronts Maddox, who explains that he can't free her because he needs the ideas, and in a classic Twilight Zone-esque be careful what you wish for type deal, Morpheus decides to supply all the ideas he could ever want and more. Maddox breaks down at a lecture, overwhelmed by story ideas. He can't stop thinking about them, saying them, and eventually writing them in his own blood when he doesn't have a pen. Desperate to end his suffering, Maddox frees Calliope. Having been granted release, Morpheus and Calliope meet once again and make a sort of peace with one another, with Morpheus even agreeing to end the curse he put on Maddox, because Calliope says it's necessary for her to forgive him. Maddox's dream-induced madness has ended, but with the loss of Calliope, he realizes that he'll never have another idea to write again.
Excellent. Thank you for that summary, Sean. All right, so we are going to skip right over to Ashley for your hot take from this double feature episode.
Yes, thank you. So I guess my hot take is that I was raised too much by Homeward Bound for the animated cats to work for me, I think. I was looking forward to it initially. And I think it's more the voice of the tabby kitten, Rosie Day, who is an adult woman. I think it took me out of it a little bit. I know that it was animated. You're gonna have a bit of distance from the subject, but I think I would have not felt so distant or lacking in empathy in this case if they had actually had a child voicing the young kitten, which there are child actors everywhere. I think they would have been able to cast somebody. I think that's a casting change I would have made. As far as the Calliope, half of the episode was concerned, heartbreaking as always. Really uncomfortable to watch Arthur Darvill be evil. Having seen him as Rory in Doctor Who, I wasn't thinking I would be able to believe him to do such evil acts, and then he pulled it off really well and really subtly, I would say. So I think the performances in Calliope impressed me more than the voice acting in the Cats episode, or Cats half of the episode impressed me. When I thought it was going to be flip-flopped, I thought I was going to kind of be bored by more live action interpretation and more impressed by the animation.
All right. My hot take is, I had heard, this was called a bonus episode of television, and I thought that it was going to be entirely self-contained. So the cat story was entirely self-contained. You could kind of show that to anybody, like maybe they need, oh, that's the Dream King, maybe. But I thought it did a good, like anybody I think could have watched that and could have, understood it as a story. It has a beginning, middle, and end. And, that's it, right? The Calliope story, though, it felt like it was, I mean, I obviously knew the direction it was going to go. And so wonder how they were going to do this. But you do need to see that to know some of like how Morpheus is feeling, because it seems like he is relatively new. He is relatively new to being released when he visits with Calliope, based off the newspaper and like kind of how he looks and everything. And so I did think, like, how many people actually watch like this extra bonus episode that like dropped a few weeks after like the first season, got out there, because, talking about like that they have a son together, and like, who is that? And just like introducing like a character, like that, with knowing that we're not going to get any completion, at least immediately. And so I did think that was an interesting choice to set that up. And maybe it was one of those things where, they didn't originally put this out because they weren't sure if they were going to get renewed for season 2. And they ended up putting it out before they knew, but maybe they had a good idea that they were going to, because it definitely leads you like, oh, right, like we know we have the Lucifer side of it, but that could also be like done, but this is definitely like, oh, like there's another there, like these people had, a son, and like that is just kind of out there. And it's the Greek hero of legend,
Orpheus.
So yeah, so pretty cool stuff. Sean?
They're for the last storyline, the back half of season 1, there's a lot I was critical of. Some of it I felt like didn't work, and then some I thought was kind of, poorly adapted. Like, I mentioned Rosa's character, and we all kind of had some lighter issues. But I, can say that with this episode, I am entirely back on board. I unequivocally really loved it. To me, it kind of hit those heights that haven't otherwise been hit since, episode 6. And I think that comes down to a few things. I think they stuck the landing absolutely on the adaptations. They sort of hewed very close to the original comics in terms of like the narrative, if not, visually it's very different. And I haven't always understood throughout the adaptation, like why. In most cases I have, but there have been some times where I've been like, why adapt this scene word for word and leave this scene out entirely, There's all sorts of considerations that could come in there. I'm sure there can be, any number of things. But I feel like this was just expertly adapted. It really worked for me. The few changes that they did make all made sense to me and seemed very like thoughtfully done. And when they chose to just, straight up bring the comic to life, I thought it was absolutely successful, which is tough because it's like Dream of a Thousand Cats is one of my favorite single issues of any comic book ever. So this is, sort of high praise for me. I really enjoyed the animation. We'll talk more about it, presumably. It's like an animation of excess in a lot of ways, and it's very different from Kelly Jones's pencils. Kelly Jones, who illustrated the Dream of a Thousand Cats comic book story. Kelly Jones is like one of my favorite pencilers from when I was a kid, because I first encountered his work on Batman covers of the mid-90s, and it was like so exaggerated and like gothic and theatrical, but in a much different way than other 90s comic books, which were all, very big muscles and big guns and tiny waists. And Jones's work was just as exaggerated, but in this very different way. And so I always really appreciated that, because it just showed me that what you could accomplish with a different style of illustration in this like era of a sort of, this kind of depressing monotony. So Dream of a Thousand Cats, I think, is really some of his best work in the comic. If you read that book, I mean, the fact that he's able to convey emotion with these largely like realistic illustrations of cats was very impressive to me. So it was kind of surprising to me that even though they took the animation in a much different direction than those original Jones pencils, I still absolutely loved it. And then perhaps kind of more than anything, I really love episodic television. I like that these were largely self-contained stories. You know, I'll always love those like 30 or 60-minute episode structures that are like a short story or a, you know, like one act play or something, you know. That's just a personal preference.
You're a big like NCIS guy.
Well, no, I've
Chicago
never seen
Fire,
that.
like all those
Okay, I mean, I was thinking
Blue
Star Trek,
Bloods.
Twilight Zone, X-Files. Those are the kind of television shows I love. Yes, I'm out of my depth with the procedurals that like my
CSI Miami.
yeah no can't
the
say I've
sunglasses?
ever
Okay.
seen it. But yeah, so this whole episode was sort of like Neil Gaiman presents the Twilight Zone to me, and I absolutely love that.
All right. Well, you know, my cat just walked by doing something kind of weird, so I'm gonna go make sure that she's not plotting my my doom, and we'll be right back. All right. So for our scene by scene breakdown, we're actually gonna start with taking a look at the animation and how you all felt about it. You know, this is the first time that we see something like that in the series, and thought it'd be good. I mean, it's a different story; it's a one-off story, and it was animated. So I was just kind of wondering, you know, Sean, you gave us a bit in your hot take, you know, about enjoying it, you know, and maybe some initial concerns because of your love for kind of the original one. So I thought maybe we could tee up Ashley on the animation side. How do you feel about animation, Ashley?
I usually like animation quite a bit, which is why I had been stoked for this episode. And I don't know if maybe I'm the opposite of Sean now hearing his opinion, if, especially when you haven't set up an episodic series, having then one standalone narrative in the midst of a continual narrative just kind of threw me off and threw me out of the game. And as far as this episode was concerned, I thought there were stills that I would have captured and thought, this is gorgeous, I would love a print of this. But it really didn't capture me until the prophet, so the cat Sandra Oh's character, was on her own journey to the dreaming and to the cave to meet Morpheus. That it really drew me in, even though I knew it was going to happen. I think once we went into a realm where it felt suitable to have this really odd sort of, I don't know what frame rate this animation was being presented, because I don't know a lot about film in general, but the flow of the animation, I felt like it suited another realm as opposed to trying to depict quote unquote real life that we've already experienced in the rest of the series. So like, why is it animated now? I just felt a little disjointed to me. As far as the actual quality of the animation, I thought it was very pretty, but again, it just felt like it suited some other transport of some kind to another space-time realm, etc., than to demonstrate the rest of the narrative.
Would you have liked a mocap Meryl Streep cat version?
I don't want to, you know, I would really like to avoid another rendition of Cats the musical. Not looking for that. I maybe just a transition in between, you know, like live actions. Like I said, Homeward Bound into an animated sort of dreamlike sequence, I think would have been cool. And again, I think it mostly has to do with my dislike of the voice for the younger cat, because I found it so grating. I was just as moved as I was reading the comic when her kittens are drowned. Like, my husband and I were clutching at each other when that happened. It's horrifying. But yeah, that little kitten voice was just grating on me, and I think it just took me out.
It was a little babyish. It did take me like it caught me off guard at first.
Yeah.
It took me a little while to get used to, but I did after a while. It's just, when you first hear it, you're like, whoa,
It's like,
the sounds we're making? Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
It's surprising to me. It really is how much I enjoy this. I mean, it's a very elaborate animation process. Hisco Hulsing was the director of
Yeah.
this sequence and sort of masterminded the animation efforts. And, from what I've read, they're doing live action, like a sort of on location shooting, and then they're doing 3D computer modeling of the cats, and then they're also rotoscoping that and doing sort of like classical 2D animation on top of that, and then behind all of that are these oil painted backgrounds.
Okay.
So there's just so much effort going on there, and like so many different things. That it does add up to produce this very like sort of dreamlike, otherworldly quality. But I thought in particular, the backgrounds I thought were just like absolutely gorgeous. Those oil painted backgrounds of the graveyard and her journey to the cave of the Cat of Dreams. The one thing with the animation that I was very torn about. I even got used to the rotoscoping because I feel like rotoscoping has its place, but I'm not crazy about it.
Could you give another example of rotoscoping? Because maybe I just wasn't connecting the dots as far as my exposure to it.
Yeah, so the first place I saw it was Richard Linklater's Waking Life.
New to me.
Or the Aha Take on Me video is sort of like that.
Thank you. Funny that's the thing I'm familiar with. Okay, got it.
Yeah, they're filming actual people and then they're drawing over that.
Okay.
That's sort of my understanding of my very basic understanding of the rotoscoping process. And they're doing all of that here, plus all of that computer animation, all the regular 2D animation, all the oil painting. Like it's just so very elaborate. But Neil Gaiman has in the Sandman comic, he always pushed art forward, in the medium. He encouraged people to try different things. He wrote to their strengths, right? They always sort of swung for the fences there. And so it was kind of nice to see that done in the animated adaptation too. And the one thing I was kind of torn on was like, well, let me ask you all this. Would you have liked their mouths to move?
A little bit, I think, maybe.
I did not need mouth
I thought about
movement.
this a lot.
Yeah.
No,
I think that's because I thought they were, they're cats and they're speaking and
telepathically.
They're not speaking. Yeah, I thought it was. Yeah, I thought it was all kind of communicating that way. Anyway, so.
See,
I think it is. it's nice when you have a close up of somebody to see,
expression,
movement when they're communicating. Yes.
Yeah, because the prophet's so calm when she's like, "Yes, I felt the last heartbeats of my children." I was like, "You're so chill about it."
I mean, Sean, it sounds like you're being a little discriminatory against telepathic people, so just watch out for that. Just
okay. I mean, yeah.
Jean Grey's coming for you. That's all I'm saying.
That is important to keep in mind. Yes, there's room for everyone, really. But yeah, and then I went and watched a bunch of. I was like, do I like when their mouths move? I watched little short videos from Lady and the Tramp and Oliver and Company, and then the Lion King and the live action Lion King or the computer Lion King. I don't know. I didn't see it. I just watched a couple quick videos of it. I was like, yeah, I think I do like mouths moving. I think I'm just into if we're gonna anthropomorphize them, let's do it.
Well, right, and I guess
but
my
that's
thought
a very
is
small quibble.
But now that Ben has brought it up, if they could communicate telepathically, you think they wouldn't have nearly as much trouble organizing on this whole concept of retaking the Earth, reclaiming the Earth again.
Maybe it's really close range telepathy.
Their radio signal's just a little off.
Just a few.
Yeah.
I have to figure they're doing something with little eye movements and tail twitches and pheromones and things like that. And then the telepathy is the closest equivalent we can get to it. That's sort of how I'm justifying it in my head.
I like it.
Fair enough.
All right, so why don't we talk about the first half of this first story? So we see this little baby kitten wakes up. Sean gave us a great summary of this. Ends up seeing a nice Tommy cat outside, ends up sneaking out in the middle of the night, walks and hears the prophets tell the story up until about what happened to her, about feeling she thinking that, oh, we're still in control, but realizing we're actually not in control because, as we've mentioned, her kittens get taken from her and drowned by the worst human in the world. And then we just see her fall asleep in front of the fire. So I will say, I know I normally don't jump in on these. I had thought about having Jenny watch this one, just this first one. Like, oh, the cat one is cute. I'm sure she'll probably like it. She likes cats. And then I was like, actually, absolutely not. She is not going to watch this. She's not going to see 4 kittens put into a bag with a brick. I don't even want to watch that. I felt bad that Sean and Ashley had to watch it, but you did. So you can take this in any direction, but I thought you all might have thoughts on that.
I just made Joy watch it with me while we were eating dinner like 20 minutes ago. So that's sort of our different approaches relationship-wise. Yeah. Well, the one thing I just want to call out quickly here is the amazing setup to this story, which I think, Neil Gaiman's greatest strength as a storyteller, in my opinion, is his setups. And it's those, I've talked about this before, those kind of what if moments that just spark the imagination and just make you want to have to hear more. And this is a perfect example of that. It's what if all the cats in town, domestic and stray, tomcat and kitten, snuck into a graveyard at night to hear a cat tell a story? What kind of story would she tell? And that's such an amazing setup, and that's what we get. It's great. Even though, the story itself is very it's very classic hero's journey story. Cat leaves home on a mission, wants something, goes through some kind of trial, gains some knowledge, returns, right? It's a very normal thing. It's just done in that very sort of Neil Gaiman way that very much appealed to me.
Did either of you hold your breath when the kitten leapt from the window onto the bridge? Because that deeply stressed me out.
I did not.
They really, I mean, that shift in perspective where you see sort of you see how that fragile, frail little kitten trying to make that leap, and they give you the top-down camera view, and you're seeing how far the ground is below. It was really effective to
it was
make
very
you catch your
effective.
breath.
Definitely.
And the tomcat's just you need to work on your balance and your landing, and it's just how callous are you? Could have died.
Oh, I loved it because he said, good jump. Need to work on the landing. And I was like, that's great. That's great advice. This is
that uncle energy we've been talking about throughout the whole series.
Yeah.
Corinthian, this freaking tomcat, trying to get young people to do dangerous things.
True uncle magic.
Oh, my goodness.
But speaking of kittens,
anything else on this? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the horrible drowning sequence of kittens in a bag, they got the audio right on that for sure. That, I wasn't sure how they were gonna do, but to have that perspective of bag sinking and the meowing still continuing, and then that being echoed later, I thought was actually very effective and really stressed me out.
Yeah,
I feel like I have a bit of a hard time buying the drowning kittens thing in 2022, 2023. It just seems the British get up to some weird stuff sometimes. That seems more like a 70s thing to me. I don't know. I can't imagine anyone thinking that that's okay at this point,
Yeah, I don't know. I can save that opinion for another time, Pat. You can cut this. But I did find it, and this is probably where the animation was still a little off to me, was when he was leaving with the bag of kittens and the wife was chasing after him, trying quote unquote heavier quotes to stop him, but didn't even bother trying to actually take the bag, get in the car, nothing. And do they only have one car? I'm surely there was a way she could have actually effectively stopped him, and it just didn't. It just seemed off. The timing was weird, and it was just oh, well, gonna go drown a bag of cats again. He's just gonna do what he's gonna do.
But I wonder if that
you
was
can
normal
tell
at some point.
I think in the Victorian age, it was somewhat more. I do think that it was, there's definitely something else there going on in that relationship, because you even see like once he's back and they're sitting there, he says, who would want 4 brats running around? And she says something like, I guess, and it's like, this woman wants children. He does not want children and is imposing that here. Like, you can definitely tell that.
Yeah, it just, again, with that animation where they're outside in the car park and everything, there was that weird timing sequence that felt like, how enabling are you? But I agree, that was a good line that was included in there to kind of inform the relationship. I guess maybe it's just, I can't imagine being in a relationship like that, so I just got angry at her for not doing more.
Totally.
I don't think there's anyone in my life who would let me drown a bag of kittens.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only other thing I want to call out from this section is I thought they did a really good job with their quick cat love story. It's just like you see the Sandra Oh cat and then the other cat's outside and she's like inside and she like looks at him and then she kind of like turns away and she looks back at him and gives this like long slow blink, and I was like, oh yeah, I get it, those cats are hot for each other. I don't even know really what that looks like, but it would look like this.
Well, and it's so funny too, that was actually something I thought they did really well, was cats do communicate affection and comfort by a slow blink to other cats and to their owners. So like, and frequently, like, our cats will come in the living room, and now that I know this, I do this. They'll like wait for me. I'll look at them, and if I slow blink, then they will sit on the couch with me. If I do not do that and I just stare at them, they will walk and find somewhere else to sit. Try it sometime. If people have cats, try it.
Yeah.
Fun fact.
Yeah.
So I don't have a cat. I'm just going to walk around the neighborhood slowly blinking at all the cats I see.
So the Siamese cat falls asleep and ends up in the dream realm. She is greeted by a skeleton crow and is told that she can get revelation from the dream, or the cat of dreams, the dream of cats. So we see her making her way through all these different areas, first through a boneyard, then a place where it's so cold every step was pain, then in the wetness where her paws are numb. She also goes through a place where she hears her kittens meowing for her that died. So a very arduous journey. And then eventually we see her at the gates into the palace where Dream is. And we recognize this because we see the hippogriff, the dragon, and the griffin are there. And we've seen those 3 in other places just outside of the castle into the inner sanctum of Dream. Our cat then goes inside and meets with the cat version of Morpheus, where she learns that cats used to run the world, not humans, until the humans dreamt that they had always been in charge and that humans were always on top. And that's when everything changed, and it has always been that way because of the way that the humans dreamed it. She then goes, and this is why she is telling the story, is because she is trying to get at least 1,000 cats, because it may only need that many to make this dream come true, so that way cats can be on top again. So Sean, let's kick it over to you. What do you want to pull out of here?
Well, yeah, you mentioned it. I just want to shout out to the hippogriff, the wyvern, and the griffin, the guardians of Dream's castle. This is the first time we've seen them brought to life, right? And right, like we haven't heard them speak. We haven't
maybe we haven't heard them
anything
speak.
like that.
Yeah, we've seen them move around.
Did they move?
Just not talk.
Were they kind of moving?
We've seen them move. Yeah, in one of the
Okay.
things. So that's about it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, but I just think I love those characters. They're a lot of fun, and they're so gruff and take their jobs so seriously. They're just great, and so I'm really happy to see them brought to life here. And they sort of look like stone gargoyles. They've got some crumbling stone surface on them, and it was a nice interaction. Little character moment for our Sandra Oh cat, right? Because she just kind of hisses at them, and she's ready to throw down with these mythical beasts. And we also got a nice line there from the wyvern that says, as she's going inside the cave, he tells her dreams have a price. And I think that is, that could sum up some of the thematic concerns of the entire episode very well. Both the Calliope portion and this Dream of a Thousand Cats portion, because this is, and I'll get more into this later, but this is an episode that I think does interact quite well. Even though these were separate comic book issues, they were back-to-back issues when they were originally published, and I think they speak nicely with each other. And that idea of dreams have a price, and is this a price that you're going to pay, or are you going to try to cheat your way around it, right? And that's kind of the different the different perspectives some of the characters we deal with, the different perspectives they have. So I like that line there, and I think it's very central to understanding of the complete episode.
Ashley, how about you?
Yeah, after having heard Sean describe how this animation was created, I think this is where those oil painting backdrops really suit well for the episode, being on this journey and it becoming more grand and more epic over time. I think maybe that's the thing, is it didn't feel like there was really a scenic break between real life and the streaming, apart from different landscapes. But it was all so equally grand that I didn't feel like I was traveling anywhere new as far as depth was concerned. So having those grand oil painting backdrops for this half of the episode, I think really went well. And now thinking back, I can appreciate it better than I had.
One other little thing I want to call out here was there's a line I loved. I mean, I very much liked the dream and interaction, like in the cave. Thought the cave was very cool. Dream looked very cool. I guess they probably wouldn't have like traditional animation cells like you could get from like an old cartoon or something, right? Because it's produced in a different way. But it would be great to have like an animation cell of that interaction between that massive dream cat cloaked in shadow, and there's bones and skulls all over in his cave, and the little Siamese cat out in front. But they have their interaction, and one of the things I really liked was when the cat is going out into the world to spread her message. She's describing her interaction with him, and she says, "I had seen the soft underbelly of what he told me," and I love that line. It's a little more pointed of a line than it was in the comic. It was just in the comic, it's just something like, "Oh, I'd seen the underside of what he told me." But I love, I've seen the soft underbelly of what he told me as a turn of phrase that basically means I understood, what he meant, what his implication was. But it's for, a creature that it's a carnivorous hunter. So I love that.
Right.
So it seems to be fitting their lifestyle that you would describe things in such a way. I thought that was great.
Thanks, Sean. Anything else on the first story before we move over to Calliope?
One last little thing is that I also wanted to shout out the score here. I thought the scoring was very effective throughout the episode, really. But it's always a really big part of animation, and I just noticed it here, and noticed how much it enhanced the experience of this part of the story overall. Especially like there's a little like final sting with the dreaming cat at the end. It's just it's a little great like little Twilight Zone moment. Like she's dreaming of hunting people. Yeah. So.
I was going to withhold my comment, but now that you've brought it up, that's the very thing that kept me from taking this half of the episode too seriously, because it made me laugh so hard. I was like, oh, that's right. This little kitten's going to get me someday. And it just made me laugh, that little sting that you were talking about. I do agree. Yeah. The score was beautiful, but it was just that last little bit that I'm like, watch out.
Yeah, that's the part that seemed very Twilight Zone to me. And because I have so much love for the Twilight Zone, like the 60s Twilight Zone, like I think that's just yeah.
Well, I just glanced behind me, and it looks like the Beans is trying to fall asleep. So I'm going to go wake her up real quick, and we'll be right back. For the next story, Calliope, we were introduced very early on to our main protagonist in this short story, Richard Murdoch, who's a struggling author after his breakaway success. And we see him struggling to write, being hounded to get his draft in, get something. His agent's bothering him. The people that the publishers are bugging his agent and bugging him. And he really seems lost. And this, when we first meet him in this episode, but as luck has it, he knows Erasmus Fry, who is an aging author, and he is able to get a Bezor for Erasmus Fry in exchange for something that will help him write better. He learns, definitely at first to his like astonishment and horror, but not a whole lot of astonishment and horror, that Erasmus had the youngest and the ninth muse, Calliope, for about the last 60 years imprisoned, and has been using Calliope as a muse for all of the writing that he has done. And so we will end this first scene with Murdoch taking ownership of Calliope and moving her into his house. So, Ashley, from the first half of this story, what do you want to talk about?
I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about Arthur Darvill playing Richard Maddock, but I think the introduction of him teaching this class and it being a very basic sort of writing seminar, and him having like his sort of favorite students like Nora wanting to help him out and like curry favor with this author was really effective. Like this was a familiar sort of situation to me. It was a familiar scene to me, and I think that it didn't feel too forced. I think sometimes when you see academia portrayed on screen, it feels like, yes, leather-bound books, academia, welcome to Hogwarts. And this didn't feel like that. It felt totally realistic. And I like the fact that we have this introduction of Nora as this side character. I thought it suited well, and this Nora is the one that brings him the Bezoar, and like basically says like it would have been thrown in the trash anyway. Like I just thought that was kind of an interesting sort of exchange, but I liked that they included that, and that they included that relationship to then come back to later. I thought that was an effective inclusion. So I appreciate that detail, especially considering you have this student who admires the work of this author, who was a student that admired the work of another author, and seeing what one offers to those that we admire, not disingenuinely, but because they have something we wish we had. And so then seeing that sort of like cycle itself through, as well as being kind of an interesting discussion on gender, not to get too much into that, but I just thought it was kind of it was an inclusion that I think did more work than maybe they had initially realized. So I really thought that was kind of clever.
That I hadn't really thought about it at all, but that was a conscious choice, right? Like that's not something that was in the comic series.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, that was an inclusion just for this. So yeah, that I had not, it hadn't occurred to me why at all, and I hadn't really thought about it much deeper than it just being like, oh, we got to add in a little more plot and characters than just like two people. And now that you put it in a bit more perspective, that's very helpful. Oh, one thing I want to call out from that first scene is Richard's first line being, "You can't force a character to do something just because it's easier." I thought that was such a hilarious way to start off this story, considering his arc and the whole thing that happens in it. That is wonderful. And the slide in the background reads "controlling the narrative."
Yeah.
Sean, what else did you have from this first portion?
It's perfect.
Well, really quick, I just wanted to ask Ashley, who is the actor, and how
Arthur Darvill.
Were you familiar with him?
He played Rory in Doctor Who. And so Rory,
is that one of the doctors?
no,
Or is that one of the
he's
companions?
That's one of the Who's.
it's better. Companion's boyfriend. So
Okay.
in the Matt Smith run of Doctor Who, his companion is Amy, and Amy has a boyfriend, very hapless, named Rory. And Rory, I mean, truly, like, bumbling, head over heels for Amy, but, like, kind of useless, whereas Amy's, like, the super adventurous one, always rushing off into danger with the Doctor. And Rory loves her so much that he's trying to protect her in the best way he knows how. And he's not cruel. He's not, like, one of those idiot bruiser boyfriends. He's just, like, the kind of guy who would trip over his own shoelaces. And then he has this incredible heroic character arc throughout the entire series, the run of Matt Smith's Doctor, in which he literally becomes a centurion that guards Amy as she's, like, trapped. And he, like, protects her from, like, all space and time. And waits for forever for her to be able to reemerge. And so then it's such a change then to have him play this tragic figure who, you know, succumbs to his own greed and cruelty. That's part of why I was so set up for, like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to believe this. That's why I was so impressed with his performance, because he did so in a way, to me, that felt subtle and nuanced, as opposed to, I'm evil now, haha, twirly mustache.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Well, I also want to shout out an actor here, which is Derek Jacobi, who played Erasmus Fry. I think he did an amazing job. I loved how just, you know, what a jerk he was. I knew him, the actor, not Erasmus Fry. I knew the actor primarily from Gladiator. He was in the movie Gladiator from like a million years ago now. But he's been in a ton of stuff. He's done a lot of Shakespeare. He also did Doctor Who. He was in an episode of Frasier. I don't know. But he was also apparently in the running to play Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs alongside, it was him against Daniel Day-Lewis and, of course, Anthony Hopkins. So, and then I was doing a little bit of reading about him because I just really enjoyed his performance in this. But I found that he'd actually played a scumbag artist before in a biopic of the painter Francis Bacon called Love is the Devil. He played Francis Bacon. Yes.
Oh, that's good.
I know. I really want to see it. I've never seen the movie. I really, really want to see it now. He plays Francis Bacon, and a young pre-James Bond Daniel Craig plays the guy who tried to rob Francis Bacon's house, broke into his house. Francis Bacon caught him there, and then was just like, why don't you just stay here with me? And so he was his, like, lover, and they had this, like, horribly, like, cruel, like, sadistic relationship between the two of them. And the fact that there's a movie about this, I'm very excited to see it. I'm always fascinated by Bacon and his work, so I might watch that tonight.
Tilda Swinton's in it too.
She's a host movie night.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. But cool. I thought he played his part with such ferocity and resentment toward Calliope, and I thought that was really effective. It's like everything he says to her is with such viciousness, and it's like, why? Because, I mean, she's his captive. She's done everything he's asked. Why hate her so much? And, I think the answer is that it wouldn't be possible without her. None of what he has comes from him. He didn't pay the price for his dream, right? He let her pay it, and he'll never be able to escape that shame of, ultimately not being responsible for the work he's taking credit for.
So this was Homer's muse, in the canon,
Muse, yeah.
Right? And we're, thousands of years removed from Homer and are still reading Homer. Whereas Erasmus Fry it seems like within his lifetime, everybody forgot about him. And it just got me thinking, like, okay, so, like, what can a muse do? Like, do you have to have any innate talents for a muse to bring something out? Before we started recording, everybody, a little peek behind the curtain, I was doing some terrible accent work, reading some high school theater that I was in, and mentioning that I'm, like, tone deaf. But, like, if I had a captive muse, like, I would have had originally thought, like, oh, well, you have to have some base level of skill to actually get anything out of the muse. But I feel like what they're trying to tell us in Erasmus is, like, you could have zero baseline of skill, but capture the muse is so powerful that in your lifetime you could be successful, but then you're not going to be remembered. Whereas, like, Homer obviously had the skill set and had the muse and was receiving the muse's however you want to call it, like, specialness in, like, the right way versus, like, the wrong way. But yeah, I kind of got my head around that for a bit, wondering, like, if I had a muse, what could happen?
Well, and I think in this case as well, like, audiences have changed. Homer had a captive audience. It's not like you have, contemporary publishing, or you don't have the publishing industry in Homer's time like you do in both Erasmus and Maddox's time. And those audiences change, and like he later says, like, if you can do anything, please, bring to reprint that, I forget the name of the book that he wrote.
Here Comes a Candle.
One. Thank you. So you might be granted success, you might be granted skill, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be for everybody. Because again, you don't have that same sort of captive audience that Homer would have.
Yeah. Quick embarrassing story.
Please.
So back in the MySpace days, you could, on your profile, list off your favorite books. And I thought I was being so very smart and clever by only listing fictional books on my MySpace profile page, among them being Erasmus Fry's Here Comes a Candle.
Oh my gosh. Did anybody notice?
Fictional books. Not
books that don't actually exist. Yes. Not books of works of fiction.
That's very clever. Very clever.
Did anybody ever notice?
I think maybe like one person noticed one of the books on there. Yeah. But, that is just me being like, I'm so smart. Oh, isn't that clever? But, yeah.
That's hilarious.
Teenagers are the best. Excellent. All right, let's move into our next scene. I did want to just put a quick note in that we are going to be talking about sexual violence and assault somewhat briefly in this next section. If that's not for you and you just want to check out, there'll be liner notes that'll let you know when you can skip forward to when we are wrapping up this episode. So Richard has taken Calliope back home, and after struggling to write anything, decides to take the easy way out and goes up and rapes Calliope in order to get some of her power so that way he can write. As Sean mentioned in the summary, we then see him unbuttoned, disheveled, already on chapter 3, but with a nice cut down his cheek, indicating to us that this was something that was taken with force and not something that was consensually given. From there, we see that this next book is even a bigger deal than his first one. It's already being adapted into a screenplay. There's a bidding war. Everything seems to be going so well for Richard at this point. He even changes his name to just be Rick. And I think that's like the douchiest thing he does by far. Next, we see Calliope, who is getting more and more desperate to be free, reaches out to her mothers, the Fates, who come and tell her that there is nothing that they can do to help. But they do indicate that maybe the Endless could help. Unfortunately, at this point, Morpheus is trapped, and while an ex-lover of hers, they did not part on good terms, even though they have a child together. Calliope still decides to pray to Morpheus and see if she can get any help from him. So, Sean, what do you want to talk about from this middle chunk of the second story?
Yeah, well, I suppose we should start with the assault stuff because, it's handled very differently in the comic, and I think it's handled much better, honestly,
In the TV show or in the comic?
in the TV show.
Yeah, okay.
I think, it's difficult to do stuff like this because a lot of the violence that happens in the show and on TV in general is pretty, like, outlandish violence. It's things that, for the most part, aren't happening in people's lives, but people are assaulted and exploited and dehumanized, like, all the time in real life,
Right.
and probably some viewers of The Sandman. So I felt like they took that into account and handled it in a way that seemed very thoughtful, and they were able to get their point across without having like a graphic rape scene like the comic does.
Yeah, the comic's really hard to
Yeah.
read that portion of it. It's definitely it's very violent. It's very it also makes you hate him much more. I will say
Yes.
that was one thing that I did struggle with a bit. I was like, I mean, is he that bad of a guy? Like, he's keeping her locked up. That's kind of bad. In the comic, like, he's a terrible person. Like, it's very easy to see that.
Yeah, that's like the first thing he does is attack. He
Right.
gets her home and then attacks her right away. And it doesn't
Exactly.
even have any connection. He's not even really thinking about her gifts at all. He's just like,
It's just
this
power.
is not.
Yeah.
This is an object for my enjoyment, and I'm going to treat it
Right.
as such.
Absolutely.
Here, you see him. He's trying to justify. He's trying to hang on to his concept of himself as a good person, and that front that he continues to put up as
Right.
his as his fortunes rise and all that. But that call comes from his agent, who's reminding him that you're going to owe all this money that you've probably already spent if you don't get something written. And then when he's actually pushed, you see his pretense, his moral pretenses drop, and you see him go for that sort of very base gain.
Right.
He's just going to take what he wants.
Yep. Ashley?
Yeah, I agree. I do think it was much better depicted in the show than in the comic book. In an interview with Alan Heinberg, one of the showrunners, he had even mentioned that the panels depicting the rape in the comic, Neil Gaiman didn't want drawn ever. He didn't want that actually immortalized in the comic book as it was. So it seems like they went back to Neil Gaiman's original vision for that narrative to not have it shown, which I really appreciate for many reasons, but also because I think it is just better storytelling because it's more believable for this character.
Right.
To have convinced himself that he is a good guy, capital G, and he's just going to do this once to get over this sort of slump, and then after, never again. But then he becomes so addicted to the success that it brings him, more than he expected, to have gained from this sequel. Because when is a sequel ever better than the original? Very rarely, I would say.
Right.
That he can't help himself, and it's interesting then when he tries to woo her in other ways, and that it's just not the same. He doesn't get it, that this isn't a consensual relationship, that they're not married or even dating or anything, but he thinks that he can somehow salvage quote unquote what they have, which is nothing. Is just a very interesting, and also tale as old as time. It's just it's different when it's a muse and an immortal being as opposed to a human woman.
Did you notice that in the scene with the fates that at least I didn't see the fates shifting?
They didn't, yeah.
Yeah, because which would make sense. They wouldn't be, and they're in white, and it's a pastel background, and I like that because they're just coming we can't help. We're not trying to be sneaky or any we're not having you ask 3 questions and all that kind of stuff. It's well, we can't do anything for you. We can just give you a small bit of comfort by saying hi, essentially.
Yeah.
But I like that how they weren't shifting back and forth. It wasn't quick cuts. It was oh yeah, you could always see all 3 of them, and they're just talking to her as the crone, the mother, and the maiden, right?
Yeah, and And yet they still do their cryptic knowledge thing, right? Like they still drop that, oh yeah, and by the way, your old boyfriend is in prison now, and there's this sleeping sickness all around to kind of nudge, because that's the piece of information that's crucial to her later on.
Correct.
Right, and she picks up on it. But we've seen that sort of groundedness with the Fates with Rose's encounter of the Fates. So I do think there's something interesting to be said about the Fates being sort of anchored in their femininity and their relationship to other persons that have an understanding of their femininity or are in touch with their femininity, that I find really compelling and done very well in this show, that I think is, much more clever than people realize as far as staging is concerned.
Yeah, I think the work with the Fates is probably one of like the top things that come out of here, because they're so difficult conceptually to even like think about and just kind of understand. Like, well, like, do they do anything? Or like, do they not do anything? Like, do they just put, and if we're getting a second season, it'll be nice to see kind of how they continue to be a part of that.
Yeah. And I mean, they show up actually fairly frequently. Like, this is their 4th appearance, I think, in the first season. Right. And yet it feels really special each time. It always feels very momentous. It's never a casual thing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, it is impressive that they've managed to make that character not a gimmicky sort of fantasy role.
Right. Yeah. And not a Deus Machina type thing.
Right.
It's just like, no, like, this is just their job. Like, they're just doing their job.
Right.
Like, their universal job.
I wonder what they're doing at home. Like, I wonder what they're doing when they're not cryptically delivering information to their petitioners,
Yeah.
I guess they're just, like, weaving the loom of fate, right? Like, that's kind of what they're doing
we see the
rest of the time?
Yeah, I think... Yeah, you see that at some point in the comics, right?
Yeah, okay. All right.
I was just like...
okay, that's what they're doing.
I was just imagining them, like, making cozy soups, catching up with one another on their day.
Watching Gilmore Girls together.
Yeah, exactly.
Something like that.
Girl stuff.
I like it. Yeah.
Okay, I like that too. Yeah.
Right. Anything else in this second section?
Well, first mention of Orpheus. That's big.
True.
I don't think there's too much more to say about it right now, but we know now, this is where we're finding out that Morpheus has at least one child, and that it's the, Orpheus of myth. And that's a big drop. It'll be important.
That is.
This is the point in which anyone that has listened to a cast recording of Hadestown went, wait, what?
I'd like to see that someday. I have not listened to a recording or seen it, but I would like to.
All right, so let's take a look at the last third of this story. So everything boils to a head. We see this great moment where the smoke is drifting out of the chimney, and we realize that the call to Morpheus is actually going out because of Richard's burning of the paper. Morpheus arrives, and he is just like major ex-boyfriend, angry energy, not quite knowing where to put it. And you can just see Calliope just knowing how to talk with him and work with him. And, even though they obviously left on what seems to be terrible terms, I mean, when the Fates know how bad they were, like, that's a pretty good indicator that it was pretty bad. But you can tell, and she reflects this to him, that Morpheus has changed. He has shown up. He is going to help. And so at first he just goes to Richard and just says, hey, just let her go. Let her go, and like, we'll all be good. And he says no, because he needs the ideas. And so that's when Dream gives him all the ideas. And this is the great scene where he's lecturing in front of now an entirely filled classroom. So in the beginning of the episode, you would have noticed that it was like maybe a quarter full, 1/3 full. Now the classroom is like packed to the gills, standing room only. And ideas just start coming out of him. Absurd ideas, abstract ideas, ridiculous ideas, amazing ideas. And he has to pause to even say the ideas as he's trying to run out. That is how much they are overtaking him. Eventually, he's found by Nora and another student, and he has ripped the skin off of his fingers to use his own blood to write the ideas on the wall. At this point, he tells Nora to go back to his house and release the prisoner that he has upstairs. She goes, she finds nothing other than a book, Aramis' Fry's book, brings that back to him in the hospital. The ideas have gone away. We see that Morpheus and Calliope are back together, and they have a brief moment to talk about their son and what their relationship might be moving forward before she heads out down the streets and the scene ends. So Ashley, how do you think this all wrapped up?
I thought it wrapped up beautifully. I think Melisatani Mahout as Calliope just had all of the chemistry necessary to play opposite Tom Sturge, and she really, like, I feel like she actually carried the scenes with him, even though I think he did a great job.
Yeah.
She just had the gravitas, she had the poise, and I was just very impressed with her performance. Though Tom Sturge as angry ex-boyfriend, as you described, was truly very horrifying when he starts giving the threats out and describing what's going to happen to Rick. It was like, oh, I'm afraid for you and I hate you. So that was just really well delivered. And even, Arthur Darvill having suddenly all of those ideas flood him in the middle of that lecture hall, sort of performed like he's having this intellectual panic attack where he's like trying to stop it as it's happening, but he just can't stop talking. And I loved watching the extras in the scene as they're like furiously writing down all of the ideas as he's saying them, as if like they will also be successful if they are able to capitalize on one of these ideas. I thought that was so funny.
I didn't notice that.
That's really funny.
And the way the stairwell was lit, not to show too much, but just a hint of what he was writing on the walls. I appreciated the restraint that they showed with that set dressing, because I was worried it was going to end up looking a little too Walking Dead, as if they were going to be encountering some sort of like author zombie at the end. So I appreciated that they kept themselves from making it look too gory, but was enough to really understand what he was trying to do. Because again, like thinking about it, with the time between his exit and then him making it to the stairwell, he's only going to be able to write so much with his fingertips. We only have so much blood. Blood flows only so quickly through your fingertips. Right. Whereas, like, I think you can get away with more gore in a comic book, and it be sort of, you've already sort of suspended your disbelief. Whereas in this case, I think it was an appropriate amount of gore that suited well. And then the look on Nora's face when he says, go back to my house, release the woman locked up in the bedroom upstairs. Again, a really well portrayed, subtle look of horror as she is seeing this person that she really respects and admires and has been helping in her own way. To hear that he has possibly done something really terrible. The sort of like, sort of going back to, I'm associated with him, I've helped him with stuff, has what I've done for him somehow helped him with this horrible thing he's done? Am I an accomplice somehow? Like all of the things of the panic of learning this, and like probably what that walk to his house would have been like, is just really...
Oh yeah, I can't imagine.
Yeah, it's just, I thought it was really, this whole sequence was really well paced, expertly done, set dressing was perfect, etc., etc. I could go on and on.
Thanks, Ashley. Sean?
I thought, and I hadn't really talked about like Calliope's, role or her performance much, but I agree that it was really great. It was, it worked out really well, and Calliope was much more active in this adaptation, much more of a, protagonist than in the original story, and I thought that, she carried that well, and it all made sense, and she was constantly working towards her own freedom, by trying to convince her captor to let her go. She was ultimately, responsible for piecing that information together to get, to get Morpheus there and to get out of there. And so I thought, I thought that was a nice change, because the Calliope of the comic was, is much more passive. And especially in the end, where Morpheus asks, what are you gonna do now? And in the comic, she's like, I don't know, go away forever, I guess. Like, basically, that's what she says. She's like, well, I'm just gonna go away forever. I'm just gonna leave the mortal plane, and I'm done now. And in this, she's like, inspire humanity and rewrite the laws by which I was held. Which is like, you can do that? That's great. And that's something that Morpheus actually really needs to hear. When she's like, I'm going to rewrite the laws by which I was held. I am not going to be limited by these rules anymore, because they were almost responsible for destroying me. And I think that being added there is a nice contribution, because it reflects on Morpheus's own conflict, which is his existence bound by these rules and incapable of seeing often a world beyond them, or a different way of potentially doing things.
Yeah,
totally. That's a great point.
Yeah, and even that and in the same way, her that addition of her choosing to forgive Maddox, right? In the comic, she also just sort of offhandedly mentions, like, well, I guess you can let him go of this curse now. And he's like, all right, fine. But, in this, she's like, I'm going to have to forgive him to be able to get over this and move on. And it's a thing for me, not for him. And if we're going into the Season of Mist storyline next, like, this is a really nice bridge for that, because there's some folks Morpheus hasn't forgiven either, and it's going to be important that he does as well.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, I like how she separated out like forgiving the action and not the person, right? And like those can be two different things. It's a very high level of like forgiveness and trying to like think through that.
Yeah, absolutely. I also like Maddox's pandering answer about his artistic influences. It's like, Shirley Jackson, Octavia Butler,
like all black,
Margaret
all
Atwood.
black women.
Oh my
okay.
gosh,
Right.
yeah.
I mean,
like, okay, I'm sure, buddy.
I feel like he should have added Ursula Le Guin, and those are all great authors, and I love all of their works. But come on, man, it's like, what a douche.
Yeah, just because he's talking to like a black woman, he's like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna pull out these, like minority women out of my back pocket as my only influences. Like,
well, and I'm sure there is like some sort of like very close student of Richard Maddox's work who is just like, where do these influences show up in your writing? There is no one-to-one comparison.
Yeah. Well, she kind of calls him out and is like, actually, you remind me of Erasmus Fry, And that's actually interesting, too, because she informs him that he died by poison. Now, earlier in the episode, this bezoar, which we don't really know what Fry's going to do with it, but the thing they call out is among its magical properties is that it can, it makes you resistant to poison, can heal you from poisoning, and yet Fry dies of poisoning. So I'm not quite sure what do we make of that? I mean, did it not work, or did he actually poison himself? Was he unable to live with himself and he poisoned himself and didn't use the bezoar at all? I don't know.
He does not seem like the kind of guy that gave, two craps about anything. So I don't think he poisoned himself in like a suicidal type thing. That's I don't think that happened, but I'm not really sure.
I took it to be that he just actually didn't know how to use a bezoar. He like thought he knew based off of like general lore, but didn't do his research in the way that, say, like a Burgess Coven would have with regards to these kind of things. And frankly, maybe he even referenced some of the Demon King's work and like thought he was a scholar in it. It was like, yeah, bezoar, we're gonna do this. And like maybe ran a test and it was just like total failed experiment. He had to find a new hobby apart from writing. Okay. He lost his muse.
That's true.
That makes sense. I had a last question here. Were there any of Maddox, like, what was your favorite Maddox story idea? Did you have one that like stood out to you? Like, oh, actually, I would like to read that novel.
Oh, I'm trying to remember what they all were now.
Like, okay, so I think that the ones that I really liked was the one about the like coven of literary critics who are like doing human sacrifice to destroy an author they hate. I would absolutely love to read that novel. And then the other one I really liked, I think, was the man who inherits a library card to the Library of Alexandria.
Oh yeah,
I thought
that one was cool.
great.
The one that
Yeah.
I'm now remembering that I really enjoyed because it made me think of another science fiction author that I really love is a city where the streets are paved with time. Like I was like, how would you even? So I started actually thinking about it. I couldn't come up with anything decent, but I just thought it was a really compelling idea.
That's very fun idea. That's like a it
Yeah.
hurts your brain kind of idea.
Yeah.
All right, why don't we slide over to final thoughts, last little things you want to get here about this episode. And Ashley, we are starting with you.
Yeah, I think altogether this was an interesting sort of experiment with the genre and adaptation. I really appreciated. I like that this exists more than I would prefer it not exist. You know, it's not one of those things where I'm like, I really wish they didn't do this. Even the stuff that I didn't like, I'm still glad they attempted. So, you know, after talking about it, I think Sean had a lot of really great points about how these two narratives hung together in a way that I hadn't considered before, and it's making me want to go back and rewatch it and pick up on some of those things. Though I will say, I think I enjoyed the second half, you know, the second story with Calliope, than I did Dream of a Thousand Cats.
Got it. Thanks, Ashley. Sean?
So I guess, like I was saying a little bit earlier, that the two stories in this episode are, you know, very different approaches to stories and the concept of stories. And like I said, the price one pays for dreams. And I love that they were put together like this because they're exploring these opposite sides, these kind of different facets of the idea. You know, for Maddock, a story is something you have. It's a possession, and it can be bought and sold for the right price. And in Dream of a Thousand Cats, a story, it's not an object or possession, but it's almost like a living thing that is birthed through courage and sacrifice and dedication. You know, it's not something that can be like kept or taken. It's something that is brought forth into the world with the pain and heartache, and then there's really no telling what happens to it after that. And so I thought that was a really powerful overall exploration of what stories do and how they are made and their, you know, how they go about existing in the world.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Sean. All right, so on the whole, I think we're all really happy that we got this bonus episode. I think even if, you know, on the, you know, animation side, you know, Sean seemed to really enjoy it. You know, Ashley was a little bit more out on it. And especially some of the voice narration work that happens in terms of the little baby kitten and its squeaky little adult voice. Made it a little hard to get immersed into it. But overall, really great story, told really nicely. And it's always cool to just try something different, right? I remember when my parents loved the Steve Miller Bands, and they went to a show of his, and he tried a couple rap songs, like in the mid-90s. And, you know, like, it wasn't very good, but, like, he tried it, and it was, like, you know, a thing. And sometimes you got to let artists, like, try. And on the Calliope episode, I think we were all in agreement that this might actually be a better presentation of this story than what you get out of the comic, which maybe hasn't been something that we've said wholeheartedly about any single issue to TV episode move. But on this one, I think we thought that the way they kind of dealt with the story front to back really told a much more comprehensive and complete story. It gave a lot more empowerment to Calliope, which we all really appreciated, and allows that character to be utilized in the future and have more of a story arc. And we thought it did a really good job of showing us, you know, Morpheus's, you know, transformation as he was also locked up, but seeing him interact with somebody that isn't just like people or the Endless or some other, you know, Lucifer, some other, you know, dominion like that. It was really good just to see him interacting like in that kind of way.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Sandman Unlocked.
And remember, never trust the storyteller, only trust the story.
Thanks for tuning in to The Sandman Unlocked, an Odd Conduit media production. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Sandman Unlocked. Join us on Discord as well. Thanks to our show producer, Patrick Childers, and to Lieutenant Headtrip for our theme and incidental music. If you'd like to support us directly, head over to our Patreon. You can follow Ashley on Twitter at DEEDEE_K and on Instagram and TikTok at Ashley Mowers. Find Sean on Twitter at Lon Dogson and find Headtrip everywhere at LT Headtrip. You can get all of this info and more in the show notes. Make sure to follow and subscribe and review us wherever you listen. Until next time, and remember, never trust the storyteller, only trust the story.